3D Mowgli from the Jungle Book Acrylic Nailer Tutorial by Hotpinkzebrapolish.
Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to be showing you the Mowgli tutorial in my Jungle Book series. If you missed any of the past ones, I will put links to them in the description box below, and then tomorrow you'll get to see the last one, which will be Kaa. I hope you guys like this video as much as I do. I love this whole series, and this movie is one of my favorite ones from Disney, so I was so happy to get to make it. And don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well.
So I'm going to begin with a marbled gradient from a very light green to a very dark green, just like I have with the rest of the designs in this series. Every time I have a series like this and I show the same footage over and over again, I typically recorded the exact same, or I just use the same footage from one of the nails, but I've gotten into where I'm a little more ambitious recently, and I actually record each one and I show you each one individually. Especially with these marble gradients, they all have their own little bits of personality, and I love them all dearly, and they're all just a little bit different, so you guys get to see that. So after I've got the marble done, I'm going to press some green mylar flakes into the surface of the nail and then encase it with a layer of clear acrylic. I know I mentioned this in one of the other ones, but I'm going to say it again. You want to make sure your clear acrylic is a little bit thinner when you're encapsulating mylar flakes, because they have little air bubbles underneath them, so the clear acrylic needs to form around each little bit of mylar and get underneath it so that the nail's nice and strong and doesn't have any of those visible bubbles. So now, after it's all filed and beautiful, I'm going to be sculpting Mowgli's face, and I grabbed a tan color acrylic to start with, and I'm just going to be pressing it out and really getting his face shape down. There really is a lot less sculpting to these last two tutorials for Mowgli and Kaa than there was for, say, Shere Khan or Bagheera or Baloo. And so this part of it is just a little bit less strenuous. He just doesn't have quite as much detail, I guess, to his face. And these characters are all so, old. They're older for the Disney characters. They're not quite as old as like your Snow White and everything. But for the Disney characters, they just have a very certain look to them that gives you that impression that they're a little bit older than some of them. And so the details, when you look at the illustrations, they don't look 3D. They look very flat, which can sometimes make transferring the information from flat image to 3D a bit challenging, especially for a character like Mowgli, where his actual facial details and outlines are so minimal. He doesn't even have lips completely. And so, transferring that information and being able to translate it into getting a 3D image can always just be a little bit challenging. So for Mowgli, I didn't do quite as much of the 3D dimensions as I did for those other characters because it just didn't feel appropriate for him. So I have his nose sculpted in, I have his mouth sculpted, and his eye areas, and then just a little bit for his head. And then you're also going to need to do his neck and his shoulders coming down the nail. And depending on how big or small you sculpt Mowgli, you may also need to do his arms or hands or something if you have the space for it, or, the nail's longer, or you sculpt him smaller or something like that. And if you are sculpting him and you do want to kind of simplify him, you can leave him as he is right now, very, very basic as far as the sculpted details. I decided I wanted to give him just a little bit more dimension on his face. So I'm going to blend in the one side of his nose and then add a little bit more shaping on his cheeks. And you can keep going as far as you want with all of this detail. I felt at this point it was probably good enough, and now I'm going to take some black acrylic and begin sculpting his hair. And when you're sculpting his hair with black, you do want to be very cautious that you don't get the black acrylic in too wrong of a place, because it's going to be harder to clean it up off of either his face or the background of the nail, especially near the top where it's that really light green. So just be a little bit careful of where you're placing down each bead and try to keep it contained to only where you want it. Of course, that is a little unrealistic, but when you do clean it up, make sure that your brush is very, very wet with monomer, so that that'll act as a little bit more of an eraser than a drier brush would. Some colors you can really clean up just about any way. Black is one of those that's notorious for being kind of a stickler for smudges. Continue that. I switched to a smaller brush to give me a little bit more control over the smaller details as I'm adding some of the hair down the side of his face and a little bit on like his jawline. So just take those little bits and really stretch and pull that black acrylic. And the reason I did switch to that smaller brush is just to keep the black acrylic contained. The other trick here is using black acrylic that is slightly more wet than you may normally. That'll make it easier to manipulate and move around to exactly where you want it. The other thing is doing it small section by small section instead of trying to do a bigger zone all at once. So instead of trying to do the whole side of his face all in one bead and one pickup, just do it in 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever is comfortable for you. I'm going to add a couple little bits of black hair coming down his forehead, and you can always add more of those later with acrylic paint. Like the little hairs that stick up off the top of his head, I did those with acrylic paint instead because they would be so skinny that I felt it was just, just as good to do without those little skinny hairs for the most part with acrylic paint. I did do the one bigger one, as you can see, with acrylic. So it's kind of up to you, however you want to do it. So then after you have all of that sculpting done, kind of filling in a little bit more on his hair, smoothing it out. It's really hard to see in the video what's going on with the black acrylic because it's just so dark. So now I'm going to be adding all the details with acrylic paint. So I'm going to take really thin little lines, and on his hair, obviously you don't do any outlining because it's just black paint. And it's so black on black outlines don't really leave much of an impact. But you can go through and kind of perfect some of the details in the hair and kind of sharpen them up a little bit if you need to. Then with that black paint, I'm going to be adding all of the details on his face. And he doesn't have nearly as many different wrinkles and shapes and planes as the other characters, as I mentioned before, as far as what makes him look really 3D. So definitely the things that you do outline, make sure that they're precise. It's easier to see if a character looks a little bit off when there's less detail to go off of, than if there's just so much detail and have dimension and interest packed into it. Then if it looks just a little bit wrong, you don't notice it as immediately. So a character like Mowgli that maybe has less detail and you may think to yourself he's easier, he may not really be easier because those details that you are putting in need to be a little more precise. So after I have the outlines on his eyes done, I'm going to be doing the outline or filling in his eyes with the white paint. And then all that he really needs is a pupil and he's done. So like I said, a lot less detail in Mowgli than some of the other ones just because there's not as much to him from the beginning from the movie. So you can kind of get off easy as long as you're really careful. And then I'm going to apply some gel sealer over the background and cure it, and some matte top coat over Mowgli, and he's done. My favorite characters from this design, or one of my favorite characters from the series, is coming up tomorrow. So if you are a Jungle Book fan like me, please don't miss Kaa. And I will put links to all of these videos in the description box below, except for Kaa, but once he is uploaded, I'll add him too. And so if you missed any of the past ones, definitely check the description box for them. And I will see you next time. Bye!